Well, we're back, week 4. We hopefully you watched the video on being resourceful in your marriage and in your relationships. And so we wanted to take that resourceful idea. It's one of our core values. We wanted to take that. It's something we talk about here at Hope Community Church all the time. We talk about with the staff. We talk about it's who we are. It's our core value. And we believe that it's not our money.
Right.
That God's called us to stretch it and make it happen. And if you watch the marriage video, you heard me say, I don't believe God multiplies it until we stretch it. Mm-hmm. And so resourcefulness is just part of the deal here. And we want to take what he's given us and stretch it as far as we can. Why don't you read that scripture again for us? Luke chapter 12, verse 48.
Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required. And from him whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more.
Yeah, so we believe it's biblical. God entrusts us, and we're Americans. He's entrusted us with a ton of stuff. And so we believe it's biblical to be resourceful with it and get the most return from it. So we wanted to talk in this segment about how to teach resourcefulness to your kids. Mm-hmm. And in a saturated world of technology, and you can have everything at your fingertips and seemingly endless toy aisles, at your local store. Resourcefulness with kids can be sometimes difficult. So there's a couple things we want to talk about. I think one of the most important things is letting them see you be resourceful. Right. That you're just not throwing money at everything. That you're spending time trying to figure out how to do workarounds like we talk about.
And talk with your kids about it. I remember times that maybe I'd have the kids grocery shopping with me or whatever. Yeah. We'd look and say, well, you know what, this one's probably a better deal. So just teach them how to do that. That's not something that people naturally know to do. You're just thinking, I need ketchup, I'm going to grab ketchup or whatever it is. So just talk to them.
I remember being in the grocery store and you checking the price per ounce.
I still do it that way.
Yeah.
That's how I tell if it's cheaper. Because just because it says $3.98 doesn't mean $3.98 is cheaper than $7 whatever.
So teaching them financially how to make that money stretch and how to get the best deal and not just walk into the grocery store and just start throwing stuff in the cart. Mm-hmm. So you could teach them that at a young age. Instead of arguing with them, let them help figure out what the cheaper thing is when you're shopping. Here's something that we did a lot. We have 3 kids, 2 adult daughters and a son still at home, but we let them figure things out themselves. Mm-hmm. I remember...
To a certain extent.
Yeah. But I remember them having things that they needed to put together or figure out or problem solve. Mm-hmm. And I was determined not to just step in
and tell them do this
and tell them, well, this is the way it works. And so I wanted them to walk through the process of having to problem solve by themselves, having to figure it out, having to maneuver and put pieces together and all those things up into their teen years. If they had project they were working on, I wanted them to try to figure out how to do it and how to use what they had to make it happen.
Right, because it's not like you just leave them and say, go figure it out by yourself. It's you're kind of peeking over their shoulder. You're watching over them. You're peeking around the corner, making sure, okay, and then step in at the appropriate time if you need to. But
yeah, I think it's important for kids to have to struggle sometimes to come to a solution.
Yeah.
Because when you're adults, a lot of solutions are going to be a struggle. Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to be resourceful, a lot of times it's going to be a struggle to try to figure it out. How can I make this happen? So if we step in every time with our kids and we just solve it for them and we figure it all out, and we just hand them money and things like that, we wanted them to struggle a little bit before they became adults. We didn't want to just make it super easy their whole childhood.
And don't let him fool you. It's hard.
It is.
It is so hard to do that. There's so many times that you're thinking, I just want to go ahead and buy that. And I'm not saying don't ever buy it.
Yeah.
But it's so hard sometimes to say, you know what? If they want it, they're going to pay for it themselves. Or it is hard.
Yeah. And so our kids had jobs when they became teenagers and we just said, okay, if you want that, you're going to have to figure out how many hours you're going to have to work to get that.
Right.
Or, hey, this is coming. And so you need to budget accordingly. Mm-hmm. But that started pretty young with them. We wanted them to have to struggle a little bit to figure out life, to figure out how to be resourceful, what they had, how to stretch it as far as they could, get the most for it. And that's paid off when they became adults. So we covered this with the marriage part, and it's something, we talked about in marriage, you can't let perfection stop you from doing something. When it applies to kids, it's a little bit different application, because it's not necessarily the kid being a perfectionist. It's the parents expecting perfection
right.
From the child. And so we talked about excellence last week, and you have to really understand what your children are capable of. And I think that's part of being a good parent. And the expectation, you will never get resourcefulness out of your kids expecting perfection.
No.
It's not going to happen. And so realize I'm expecting you to be resourceful with what you have, and it may not look perfect. It may not be perfect. But they're moving forward and they're accomplishing things. And so here's something, well, we talked about this too, but in the term of kids, you need to teach them how to plan their money. You're never going to be resourceful if you don't even know where your money's going or how you're spending it or anything like that. And so teach them how to plan it. Why don't you talk about the language we never use?
So don't ever use the language that, well, we would do that if we had more money.
Yeah, if we could afford it.
If we could afford it, right.
Yeah. I personally hate that. I despise it. Like you kind of dangle something out in front of the kid and say, well, that would be so fun if we had the money to do that. And I hear people do that.
Yes, or it's one of those things that, you've got this decision and this decision, or somebody asks you to do something. You say, well, we can't afford that. Well, not necessarily couldn't afford it. You just chose to do this instead.
Yeah. Or maybe you really can't afford that at the time. We didn't want our kids walking around bemoaning the fact that they couldn't afford something.
Right.
So we would not talk in those terms. We wouldn't say, well, we can't, I wish we could do that, but we can't afford it. I wish we could do that, we can't afford it. And so what we would do is they would see us not talking like that, but figuring out workarounds. And so we did that several times to them growing up. I remember talking about getting a pool. Well, we started talking about getting a pool, and it was $10,000 to buy a pool the size we wanted, and we were thinking to ourselves, there's no way that's going to happen. So I remember you getting on Craigslist and looking for a pool. We ended up getting an $8,000 pool used for $150.
We just had to buy a liner.
We had to buy a liner and
some sand.
And some sand. Our kids could care less if we paid $8,000 for it or $150 for it.
They enjoyed it.
All they knew was they had a pool in the backyard. But we got to walk them through the process of going, hey, there's a different way to do this. We didn't need to go out and buy a brand new pool. People are selling pools all the time. We got rid of that pool after the kids grew up. So I didn't want to sit around and just talk about, well, we can't afford a pool, we can't afford a pool, we can't afford a pool.
Right.
We're going to figure it out. And that was a great lesson for them to say, hey, look, the thing doesn't look brand new, but it still works like a pool. They still swam in it. They still had friends over. And so what they learned that, okay, there's possibilities here. All of a sudden, money wasn't the only thing determining what was possible.
Yeah.
And that was a huge deal for them. All of their vehicles were like that.
Something we didn't mention in the marriage part, but just hit me, is that, something you need to understand is that God will bless your resourcefulness.
Oh, yeah.
So in instances, I feel with the pool, or we've had things with soccer cleats, or things that God sees what you're trying to do, and He's going to bless that.
Yeah. Again, if you're willing to stretch it, He'll multiply it.
Right. And
so it's so important nowadays to make sure kids know this. I think it's a transformative thing for a kid and a teenager and a young adult to realize, hey, I've got $100 here. I could either go out one night, or I could stretch this thing, and I could end up having multiple nights of fun with it, but I just got to think a little different. And so we wanted to be that example to the kids and make sure worked out with the pool, cars, clothing.
Family vacations was something for us that we, again, had a mutual friend that took me camping for the weekend. And I'm like, Chris, you in a camper, not a tent. I'm a glamper. I mean, we tried tent things and I didn't want to do that for a week.
Yeah.
But, so I was like, we've got to try this. And so just some things that happened, we were able to do that. And that's really been one of our kids' most favorite vacations is to go camping. It
ended up being a super cheap vacation. We ended up taking food with us. We didn't eat out a lot, but we were at the beach.
We did eat lots of ice cream out. We saved our money for ice cream nights.
We did eat ice cream. That's resourcefulness.
Yes. Priorities.
Yeah. But we got to do that a bunch, and it was a very inexpensive vacation. And so we weren't telling the kids we can't afford to go to the beach. We were figuring out ways to get there.
Right.
And maybe it is tent camping. Yeah. Maybe it is sleeping in the back of the car.
And I admire you for that because there's a lot of prep work behind that.
We tent camped once.
Yeah. Well, there were a couple times. Now, wait a second.
So we hope that some of these ideas will click with you. And if you have young kids, it's not too early to start. And we just believe it's part of the core of who we need to be as Christians, be resourceful with the things that God has given us. So we hope this helps a little bit. Hope to see you back next week.